In just a matter of weeks, Poland has taken in more than 2 million refugees fleeing from the war in Ukraine, and yet recently the European Parliament voted to continue its sanctions against Poland. I'm here in Przemyśl on the Polish border to explore two visions for the future of Europe, one of sovereignty and one of centralisation. To many here in Poland, the EU's sanctions are insulting, particularly when so many here are doing so much to help their neighbour in Ukraine. The EU claims Poland has upended the rule of law and has concerns about the independence of its judiciary.
We cannot and we will not allow our common values to be put at risk.
This ongoing battle between the European Commission and Poland speaks to a wider chasm between East and West. So, how will this fight end? Will Russia's invasion of Ukraine unite a people in fear of a common enemy, or will it further divisions that already exist? I will be travelling across Poland following the journey of Ukrainian refugees, all the way from the border to cities like Warsaw, where they can find a new home. I will discover just how the country has responded to the greatest humanitarian crisis facing Europe in recent years. I'll also investigate why Poland has been so generous in accepting those fleeing from the war in Ukraine, and how this is connected to Poland and Ukraine's shared history under Soviet oppression. Finally, I will speak to Polish politicians to ask them what their vision is for the future of Europe.
The relationship between European Union, mainly Germany, and Russia was catastrophic.
And what they think about the EU's continued sanctions against Poland in the midst of this human tragedy. When Ukrainians reach the Polish border, they first arrive in this place. In the last few weeks, people from all over the world have come to this border crossing to set up camp as the first contact for those fleeing the war. So these people are Ukrainian refugees literally walking over the border from Ukraine, which is just over there, to Poland.
Yeah, these people are basically getting through the foot crossing. They get help from the territorial defense soldiers in getting around, and they get into the queue. They also get here the basic help they need. So you have first aid, you have
So this is here, we see food and things like this.
Yes, they get hot food because this is 24/7. So through all day long for the past 3.5 weeks, they're getting help. The animals get food. They get fresh water, hot drinks, everything they need in order to first get on a bus and also to make them a bit more happier, because there is a big relief for them when they cross the border. You can see in their faces, you can see how they are, at one time they are happy, but on the other hand, they still need help and support from us.
After crossing the border, refugees are transported to a nearby humanitarian centre where they can rest, receive SIM cards, and restore their energy before they find a more permanent home. And I'm actually here outside what used to be a Tesco on the Polish-Ukrainian border, which is now a humanitarian centre. Can you explain the process of what happens here?
Have hot food and some food to take the fresh food. Like if people travel to other countries, they can take, I don't know, now we don't have sandwiches, but some food and just go. We see that we need more help from the politicians, because the people are very helpful, but this is not enough from the government and politician sides.
Has Poland been welcoming to you?
Очень хорошо. Нас, мне кажется, принимает весь мир. Ну, все поддерживают, все дают, все возможности дают. Только, главное, чтобы наши тоже правильно это все воспринимали, наш народ.
What do you think of President Zelensky?
It's very good. It's very good.
Once people are ready, they can take a train from the border town of Przemyśl. Trains here can take refugees all across Europe in search of a temporary home. Can you explain your story? How did you get to Poland?
When the war began in our country, I told my husband, no, I will stay in Ukraine, I will stay and I will help a soldier, volunteer, and after the bomb near our house, that happened last Sunday, we decided to leave our house and We decided with my husband just protect our kids, you know.
Это ужасный день, я его не весь помню. У меня много друзей по всему миру, но я хочу увидеть своего мужа, своего сына, быть рядом с родителями. Мы сейчас направляемся в сторону Украины.
Can you explain how you came to Poland?
We live in 10 people in one house, and all the time we hear a bomb or something like that. Now, after 3 weeks, I understand that maybe it's not good for my life and my safe. That's why I in Peremyshel and I go to Italy maybe for some time, because I want to come back to Ukraine. I very love my country.
Now, Salvini came to this town just a matter of weeks ago, and your reception to him wasn't exactly friendly, some would say. Why did you act in the way you did to Salvini?
I just want to show him what the problem is generally, because a lot of people in Europe thinks that situation, that war was started 3 weeks ago. It's not true. That war is started in 2014 when Putin for the first time invaded Ukraine and get the Crimea and things like that. So after that, we still have a lot of politicians all over the Europe support Putin. That's the wrong way, and he should know that, and other politicians in Europe should know that.
У нас много животных, дочь моя, она молодая, мне просто за нее страшно. Поэтому мы приняли решение уехать.
What is your message for Vladimir Putin?
Русский военный корабль «Ледяна».
Нельзя быть таким бесчеловечным, это нелюдь, это просто нелюдь. У нас столько людей гибнет, мирного населения, мирного. Гореть ему в аду.
Poland has been criticized in the past for not helping refugees enough. Do you think that this criticism is valid any longer?
I think there is a difference between being an economical refugee versus like really refugee who runs from the war. Now we're showing that we can help and how we help.
Most of the trains from Przemyśl will take people to other towns and cities across Poland. And it's not just the government who have been involved in helping to house refugees. I spoke to a priest who lives near Przemyśl who has been helping to accommodate Ukrainians. Now, this statue behind me of Pope John Paul II is hugely symbolic here in Poland for two reasons. First of all, he was crucial in destroying the communist rule here in the Soviet Union back in the 1980s. And of course, he's hugely representative of the deeply Catholic roots that Poland has. Now, we're going to be speaking to a local priest here who's been helping Ukrainian refugees. And I think it's within this context of Poland being a deeply Catholic country, a deeply Christian country, and of course no longer in the Soviet Union, that it's important to remember this is why Poland and many Polish people have been so generous to Ukrainian refugees. Can you explain how your church has helped Ukrainian refugees?
Pierwsze spotkanie z uchodźcami miało miejsce zaraz na początku wojny. Rodzina, pani nauczycielka, syn, jej rodzice, ojciec sparaliżowany, uciekali z tej wojny i tak się nieszczęście stało, że zatrzymał się samochód koło całego kościoła, zepsuł się samochód po prostu, co zrobić i oczywiście zatrzymaliśmy, pomogliśmy się im zatrzymać, byli od soboty do czwartku, pomogliśmy się im wyprawić w dalszą drogę, nasz kierowca, mamy taką restaurację przy parafii, razem z koleżanką odwieźli ich tam daleko, aż na Mazowsze. No i do tego dnia codziennie czujemy jakąś taką pilną potrzebę, aby tym ludziom pomagać. Chrześcijaństwo ma swoją istotę w tym, aby pomagać.
One of the many people taken in by the church is Marsha, who decided to flee her home to save the lives of her two children.
Взрыв в аэропорту, потом взрыв в карьере, и буквально вчера у нас взорвали завод, а мы живем, наверное, от завода метров, может быть, 600. И там уже прилетел снаряд.
There have been reports of human traffickers at the border, of dangerous people. Have any of the people that you know encountered any of these dodgy-looking people?
Вы знаете, я ехала почти 3 дня, я была такая уставшая, но как бы да, я вот об этом знала, и я вот боялась, потому что когда он меня вот увидел именно уже вот эксенс в этом центре распределительном, то он мне такой: вот, поехали со мной, как бы, что все хорошо. Я не думала ехать, потому что думала, что, ну, в общем, все жуткое самое. А потом я была именно очень уставшей, я просто решила поехать, потому что я понимала, мне уже плохо. Я просто так вот на удачу поехала, и слава богу, все хорошо. А тогда вот волновалась очень сильно. Такой, видимо, народ у нас, который не доверяет никому, ну, в Украине. Ну да.
Once in Poland, many Ukrainians decide to travel to Warsaw to find work and a place to stay. I went to a children's hospice just outside of the capital to find out how they had been aiding those escaping from the war. I sat down with one refugee who had just started a job at the hospice.
Вообще это было очень неожиданно. Началось это утром, где-то около 4 часов утра, 24 февраля. Все собирались на работу, у меня есть маленький ребеночек, и он очень крепко спал. Хочу присвятити, чесно, цей вірш усім українцям, які не здаються. Ні війні, ні війні, ні війні. Як посміли ви злочин вчинити? Зупиніться, благаю, прошу, хай світанок настане без бою. Вже без сліз ці рядочки пишу. Україно моя, ми з тобою. Ми незламні, як кремінь та сталь. Войовничі, живі та рішучі. Не потрібна солдату медаль. Батьківщина потрібна квітуча.
In the midst of war, services like hospices are still needed. This hospice has taken in several children from Ukraine since the invasion began and expects the number of children requiring help only to rise. I sat down with the head of the hospice and asked whether he expected Ukrainians to integrate well into Poland.
To jest przyczyna, że w Polsce nie powstają obozy uchodźców, tylko te rodziny są adoptowane przez rodziny polskie de facto, 3 narodów de facto. Mieliśmy w swojej historii epizod, kiedy zarówno Ukraina, jak i Polska, jak i Litwa były jednym organizmem państwowym. Więc w naturalny sposób Ukraińcy czują sympatię do Polaków z wzajemnością, mimo bardzo skomplikowanej historii.
It is this complicated history that goes to the core of the Polish people's response to the crisis across their border. To understand why Poland has been so generous to Ukrainian refugees, I've come to the largest former KGB prison in Warsaw. Men were lined up against this very wall and shot. You can actually see the bullet holes here. Thousands were tortured and packed into tiny rooms, locked up under the oppression of the Soviet Union. Both Poland and Ukraine share a haunting and painful history of the 20th century. This memory is still vivid within many people's minds in Eastern Europe, and therefore it is understandable why Poland has been so forthcoming in helping Ukrainian refugees. During my travels, I put this theory to both Poles and Ukrainians alike. I asked refugees, volunteers, and politicians as to why they think Poland has been so willing to help Ukraine, and if it has anything to do with their sense of a shared history.
We've been neighbors with Russia, and we know since almost 1999 when Putin was elected first time as president of Russian Federation. And every year he tried to create his legacy. His legacy is creating a third Russian empire. After the Romanovs and Soviet Union, there will be then the one of Putin. And he would not stop. And we knew that, and we tried to explain that in the Western countries, that this is how it is with Russia. And the Ukraine is facing now the worst phase of Russian Federation, and the worst scenario is being placed right now in Ukraine. So that is why we have this common history, and obviously we're a neighbor country. Since 24th of February, in my opinion, we are writing a new common history.
I came all the way from Florida because I was one of the lucky people 30 years ago to emigrate. My heart feels so close to people from Ukrainian because that's my history 30 years ago, so I decided to come and help.
So you escaped from Soviet Union to come to Florida, and now people are escaping from Ukraine to come to Poland.
Yes.
Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Why has Poland been so generous in helping Ukrainians?
Because they are our neighbor, and we probably better understand that situation, how it is fighting for the independent, for the freedoms.
Despite Poland's role in accepting millions of refugees, recent tensions between the Polish government and the European Union have not gone away. Whilst I was in Warsaw, I spoke to several key Polish politicians and asked about their relationship with Brussels.
As a Polish politician, I used to a situation like this, that the world is unjust, I can say. So we are trying to do our best in this situation. And on the other hand, as you mentioned, we have still these sanctions against Poland, which are motivated strictly political.
Now, there is an idea that there are two visions for Europe and for the EU. The first one is one that Brussels wants, so it's of integration, of federalization, of centralization.
You mean the more and more European Union?
Exactly, and many people say that this crisis may bring more and more European Union together, and people will push for more integration as a result of this Ukraine invasion. And then there's this other vision, perhaps Poland and Hungary and other Central Eastern European countries have, one of national sovereignty, one of economic cooperation, but not necessarily centralization and more European Union. Are you concerned that this crisis will be used to further this first idea that I talked about?
No, I don't think so. Of course, this vision have been exist in European Union for years, and also these tensions we mentioned, we discussed already here, are connected to these two visions. Yeah, the first, of course, it's a utopian model of European society. We know what does it mean. It caused a lot of victims. These experiences from the Ukrainian war support our vision, not the vision of something which is artificial, which is non-effective, and it's naive.
Zamiast debatować, czy mamy 50 płci, czy 80, jak chcą niektórzy wbrew naturze, to warto tę energię poświęcić na starania w obronie Ukrainy.
The EU claims they have legitimate grievances against the Polish government's actions surrounding the rule of law. I spoke to a representative from the pro-EU think tank, the Centre for European Reform, to find out the EU's perspective.
I disagree strongly with the word sanctions. This is not the European Union imposing a fine or sanctioning Poland. This is the European Union not releasing the recovery fund to Poland for fears that this money is not going to be used in the right way or is not going to be accounted for because of the independence of the judiciary. Question. This is not a question of values. We are now talking about like a very technical question on how the European Union funds and money should be used and who is accounting for it and where is this money going.
As Europe faces its largest refugee crisis in years, the future of the continent remains uncertain. The EU sanctions against Poland seems bizarre here when millions of refugees continue to pour over the Polish border. The chasm between the two visions of Europe, one of sovereignty and one of centralization, is only likely to continue to grow as this refugee crisis engulfs the entire continent.